Kwe Stephen Ojiri, part three of the history of Bushi Espionage or Bushi Tradecraft. Again, I am not addressing every single aspect of the history. I am not going to discuss every single person or clan or possible tradition. Um, but I do want. So in the first video, I focused on the Chinese war manuals, Genji Yoshie, and the House of Oi. And then in the last video, I pretty much focused on Kusunoki Masashige, the Southern Court loyalist. And now I'm going to sort of recap on a little bit and put in a few more refining points, and then we're going to move into the 1500s. And for those of you that have been patiently waiting, yes, we're going to talk about Oda Nobunaga. We're also going to talk about Iga. So, some of the refining points. So I do want to go back and I do want to say that it appears, again, this is preliminary. I'm not saying this is fact and there's no questioning. I'm saying preliminary. In terms of preliminary investigations, it appears that the Southern Court had many generals that had espionage. We know Kusunoki Masashige was the hero of the Kemu restoration, but he dies at the beginning of the Nanbokucho, and his sons Matsutsura and Masanori take over, and they definitely have espionage. They definitely have samurai tradecraft. We also see Momonoi Naotsune appears to have it, and we also see that some other families, whether you want to say Kuki or Kukami, they also appear to have it. Now, where they got it from, if the Southern Court, because if you look at the teachings, if you look at the Kusunoki-ryu teachings and the Kuki or the Kukami teachings, you'll find some similar things. So it's unclear how much of that came from particularly who, or if it came from when, per se. It all appears to be in the Nanbokucho, so in the 1300s. But we also know that the Southern Court itself is based out of Yoshino, and Yoshino has a whole bunch of its own sort of teachings as well. And now the teachings of Yoshino aren't going to be covered in this video, but it is plausible that some of the material is also related to the Southern Court itself because of Yoshino. So you could, someone else could, I won't be doing this, but someone else could track the teachings of the Kuki or Kukami and make a video about that. That would be fine, right? But you're going to see that it starts in the Southern Court, though. You're going to see that its origins are in the Nanbokucho. So, and again, it could be, it's going to be some kind of mixture of what they got from other Southern Court generals, what they got from the Yoshino tradition, and what they themselves developed. It'll be some mixture of those three factors. So we have the Nanbokucho War, and then we have the Go-Nansho loyalist and the Shadow Campaign, quote unquote, in the 1400s. Spills into the Onin War. The Onin War takes place in the late 1400s, and there's a ridiculous amount of Kusunoki family history and Akamatsu clan history and the Imagawa, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not going to go into all of that because I'm just trying to, it's too much to go into in trying to keep it just into 3 videos. So the Kusunoki, so we'll continue on here. The tradition of Kusunoki, the main line of Kusunoki, and I've talked about this in Sacred Conspiracy, the main line of Kusunoki continues onward to a man named Kusunoki Masatora in Kawachi, serving under Matsunaga Hisehide. Matsunaga Hisehide and Kusunoki Masatora secure an imperial pardon for Masatora and the Kusunoki. Basically, to be blunt, they pay the Northern Emperor off. At the time, the Northern Emperor is broke. The Northern Emperor doesn't really have any money. Broke. Matsunaga Hisehide, Kusunoki Masatora, they go to the Northern Emperor at the time. And I say he's the emperor at the time, but he's the Northern Emperor. So they go to, because the Southern Emperors are still existing, and I'll get to that later. The Northern Emperor, they go to the Northern Emperor, and they just give him, basically, they give him a shit ton of cash. and the Northern Emperor decrees that the Kusunoki is forgiven, and Kusunoki Masatora can therefore be hired by Matsunaga. He can serve as samurai. He can own all this land. He doesn't have to worry about being arrested, because for a long time, if you were caught being a member of the Kusunoki family, theoretically you could be executed. Right? You were the Kusunoki through the 1400s and into the 1500s. The clan was illegal. It was illegal to be a Kusunoki, but the enemies of the empire. But Matsunaga Hisahide and Kusunoki Masatora arrange, basically pay off the payola. They pay it off, the emperor, the Northern Emperor, and it is all is forgiven. And Matsunaga Hisahide and Kusunoki Masatora are in Kawachi, and the Yusa are there, the Yasumi are there, the Nojiri are there, wink wink, and they're running basically a giant game on the Miyoshi through the Hatakeyama. That is another video, but they're basically running schemes and game on the Hatakeyama and the Miyoshi in the area for power and influence and money and comfort, etc., etc. So the main Kusunoki line is there in Kawachi with this sort of enclave of schemers hiding, basically hidden, not hiding, but hidden within the Hatakeyama, and they're basically taking pot shots at the Miyoshi. So, where should we go next with that? Okay, fine. Let's keep that going. We know, and then we know who Kusunoki Masatora. So eventually, if you know your history, and I put this in my books, Oda Nobunaga comes into Kawachi. Matsunaga Hisahide, Kusunoki. So the Matsunaga, the Kusunoki, the Nojiri, the Yasumi, and the Yusa open the doors for him. They just change side. They join him. They meet with him, his envoys, not him personally, but they meet with him sort of in secret and are like, when you arrive in Kawachi, we will immediately join your forces. And they do, except for the Yusa. At the last minute, the Yusa change their mind and they pay for it. So without going into a bunch of history, if you guys know your history or not, research it. He marches in, takes the capital. Oda Nobunaga initially he's kind, for lack of a better word, to the shogunate, but then the shogunate doesn't know how to take a gift, so to speak, and Oda ends up destroying the Ashikaga shogunate, and that's the end of that. But now you have these Kawachi schemers are now part of Nobunaga's entourage. Unfortunately, Matsunaga Hisahide tries to scheme on Nobunaga, and Nobunaga ends up killing him. Unfortunately, also in the process, Yasumi Naomasa gets caught in between this, and unfortunately dies too. So at this point, the Yasumi and the thing about the Yasumi used to be Kusunoki retainers. They served Kusunoki Masashigi, they served Matsutsura, they served Masanori. They are Kusunoki retainers for the generations. Unfortunately, they pretty much come to an end during this ridiculous battle between Matsunaga and Nobunaga. It pretty much brings the Yasumi to the end. The Nojiri inherit their property, though. Anyway, yay! And unfortunately, Nobunaga takes the property. There's a story behind that too. He ends up saying like, "Well, I got to take this for such and such reason." But anyway, at that point, then Matsunaga's dead. The Yasumi are gone. The Nojiri are now serving as different roles within Nobunaga's forces, and Kusunoki Masatora is now serving as a something like a secretary / advisor to Nobunaga. He advises with Nobunaga, and he's also recording stuff for Nobunaga. And then, all right, so that's that. So there's now at this point, of course, you have espionage and tradecraft all over the place. So I've just chosen, because I'm selfish and I'm egotistical, I've chosen to focus on the Kusunoki because it also involves the Nojiri. No. So let's go back in time just a tad bit, though. So we'll get back to that, but we're going to jump to Iga. All right, guys. A lot of you guys asked me this question, and so I'll go ahead and include it in this video. Where do I believe that Iga ninjutsu came from? It is my opinion, based on the historical evidence that I have now, with logical, rational deduction and thinking and theorizing, that Iga got its tradecraft from Southern Court loyalists. And I'll explain why. Step number one, not the main line of Kusunoki, not Kusunoki Masahide down to Masatora, not that line. So the line I just told you about, Masahide stealing the regalia in the 1400s and then Masatora serving Nobunaga in the 1500s. Not that line. Another line of Masashi of Kusunoki's descendants are called the Issei Kusunoki, and they are in Issei. They are in Issei at the in the 1400s. So they're, in a way, they are somewhat related to Masahide's Shadow War of the 1400s. They Now this part is this is the important part. Also, a major Southern court family called the Kitabatake, the the like shogun level. Actually, the shogun. Actually, I'm pretty sure after Nita Yoshisada died, Kitabatake was named shogun. I'm pretty sure, actually. Um, the southern one of the biggest Southern court general families relocates to that region as well. So the Kitabatake and the Issei Kusunoki, that branch, are operating there. They are Southern court loyalists. They have all manner of espionage and tricks of the trade. They are right there. Also, the Kuki or the Kukami family is also a Southern court loyalist, and they also have a whole bunch of espionage and magic and tricks of the trade. The Kuki, the Kukami are there. The Kitabatake are there. The Kusunoki are there, or a branch of the Kusunoki are there. And they're there in the early 1400s. There's no record that I'm aware of that is a real and legitimate record that puts any kind of espionage coming out of Iga legitimately prior to the 1400s. But we see major Southern court espionage using families move to the region in the 1400s. And then, boom, a few generations later, all of a sudden now Iga allegedly has these masters of espionage. Oh, should I also mention that the Kusunoki of the area married the Hattori, right? So, okay, we know that the Kusunoki and the Hattori are marrying each other. Okay, so you have the Hattori, the Kukami, the Kusunoki, the Kitabatake. It really seems like that is a very plausible origin for espionage coming out of that region. We also know that there are several chronicles, historical records, explaining what the Kitabatake and the Issei Kusunoki are doing in the 1500s as well. And it doesn't say the word shinobi, but it definitely talks about guerrilla warfare and ambushes and saboteurs and things, etc., etc., etc. A little known fact is that Oda Nobunaga actually had to push out the Kitabatake and had to defeat the Issei Kusunoki as part of his subjugation of the Iga Issei region. I actually have a manual, a book, a record, which specifically details these events. It talks specifically about Oda Nobunaga's forces going up against the Issei Kusunoki. So that's where I think that the tradition comes from. We also find Southern Court loyalists hiding out in Omi, which I haven't fully really put a lot of time and investigation into that part. But based on the names and the associations, it looks like the Omi region in the 1400s may also be seeded by Southern court espionage. So personally, I feel like this is a very good contender for the origin of what is known as shinobi no jutsu coming out of these regions. Now, it's also important to note that in the late 14th, so Kusunoki Masashige himself never used the word shinobi no mono. He never used it. He had different words for spies. But in the late 1400s, there's a major change in there, not a change, there's a second wave of ideology that sort of hits the Southern court loyalist. So from the third, or from the mid 1300s ish, they're running with the things that you know from like the Jino Shotoki and Kusunoki Masashige's teachings, or they're running with those from like mid 1300s into the 1400s. But into the 1400s, naturally, of course, there's a second wave of ideology which grows from the first one but has its own flavor, creating, in so many ways, a second wave of teachings. In those teachings, the word shinobi is used. Shinobi know this, shinobi know that, shinobi this. The word, it's used, you could argue if it's being used as an adjective or if it's a proper word, but there are times when the character by itself, just shinobi by itself, with no modifiers, shinobi, blade over heart shinobi, is used in those texts. At this point, it appears that that word enters into more regular usage. In the 1300s, whenever you see shinobi, it is sneaking out of a place or sneaking into a place to set it on fire. But by the late 1400s, it is used either as a modifier to designate an infiltrator, or it is used unmistakably as a proper noun to designate a spy. Another thing that I think is a good line of evidence to sort of suggest a Southern court origin is you have certain teachings that are coming out of the region being recorded here and there, whether or not they're legitimately being recorded pre 1600 or post 1600 is sort of irrelevant at this point. In regards to, you have people that have alleged connections to the Iga or Koga region, and they're saying things that families who are absolutely connected to the Southern court loyalist but have no connection whatsoever to Iga or Koga are saying the same things. And they're saying them before. So if you believe that Iga and Koga is made up completely after the 1600s, you could always argue that the Iga and Koga pretenders stole the Southern court material from the late 1500s, early 1600s. It's possible if you want to go that route. But equally, if you wish to believe that they existed pre-1600s, that there actually was some kind of tradition of espionage there, if you wish to believe that, which again, considering that you have the Kukami, the Issei Kusunoki, the Kitabatake, right? You have those kind of families there. The probability of there being espionage in those regions goes up considerably. We're not talking about random farmers or random Nobushi or random Makuto. We're talking about major Southern court families who undeniably know the art of war and know how to use spies and know how to orchestrate spies. So, and they're in the region. So the probability is good to at least theorize that it's a contender for a possibility. Okay, right? So with that, if we are willing to accept that as a possibility, then we have the option of either saying, not the option, but we have the question of, well, if they're saying these things and we see that mirrored by these groups over here that have no connection to Iga or Koga, why are some of the things they're saying so similar? And I would argue that the reason they're similar is because they're all coming from a Southern court origin. Now, am I trying to say that every bit of espionage in all of Japan is Southern court? Not at all. I'm not saying that whatsoever. Everybody clock this. I think this is video 3. At 20 minutes, clock this. I am not saying that all the espionage in the country of Japan is Southern Court, but I'm saying there's great evidence to propose the idea that there is a massive tradition of espionage coming from the Southern Court, with the key figure here being Kusunoki Masashige, and then going through the generations, Kitabatake, Kukami, the Momonoi, these families that are known to be, well, I can't say the Momonoi. The Momonoi were known to be, are recorded to be using Kusunoki's techniques, but they disappear in the 1370s. So not them, but the Kitabatake, the Kusunoki, the Akamatsu. Yeah, the Akamatsu sort of switch on the Southern Court in the mid 1400s, though. But the Onchi family, for example, there's if I almost need a whole nother video to go through the different families, but just in a nutshell, you have many Southern Court loyalist families who the probability of them having tradecraft is either very high, or we actually have documentation clocking them as using tradecraft. And some of them go right into the regions that we're talking about now, the Iga and Koga regions, go right into them. So they either go dead into the region or they go real freaking close. Okay. I think, like I said, I think then that it is a reasonable hypothesis that the guerrilla warfare and the tradecraft, specifically the tradecraft, because remember, we've discussed that the asymmetrical warfare kind of is there the entire time. We see it popping up all over the place. We see people sneaking into places all the time. We see people ambushing people all the time. From 600 all the way to the 1500s to the 1600s, there's always a tradition of people ambushing and doing night raids and stuff. So we're not exactly talking about that. We're talking specifically about spies. And in particular for Kusunoki's teachings, the Southern Court teachings too, because it's not just Kusunoki Masashige. He starts it, but then a body of knowledge builds around it. It has a very, very keen focus on talking and conversations and dialects and idioms and this entire science of speaking and talking. And that is one of those cultural markers. When we say Southern Court espionage, we see one of those markers is this specific focus, this very distinct cultural piece of the spies being masters of language. And we see that starting with Kusunoki Masashige, and we see that following with his kids and his grandkids and his great grandkids, and into the Gonancho loyalists of the 1400s. We see that in Kusunoki Masatora's writings and his son's writings and his grandson's writings, and we see that within the sort of teachings that pop up with Southern Court retainers around the country here and there. We also see it in some of the Iga writings as well. So again, we're not discussing ambushing and night raids. We're specifically talking about spying, actual tradecraft, espionage, not asymmetrical warfare, espionage, spycraft. So Oda Nobunaga dies, Honoji, and now I can't resist, so I'm going to have to say this. Nojiri Hanbei dies defending Nobunaga at where the official graves are, quote unquote, the official graves. You guys who know history know what I mean by the official graves. The official graves of the Honoji incident. If you go to row 5 and you look for Mori Shinsuke is the same Mori who killed Imagawa Yoshimoto at Okehazama. He dies defending Nobunaga as well at the Honoji. Right in row 5 where Mori Shinsuke is, you see Nojiri Hanbei right next to him. So A little bit of Nojiri history because I have to. Nobunaga dies. Toyotomi takes over. We know that Toyotomi pretty much unifies the country. There's a whole Korean campaign. There's so, at this point, keeping track of the espionage is really, really difficult. I mean, it gets really difficult even when we talk about, for example, going back to Saito Dosan, to Takeda Shingen. At this point, keeping track of espionage becomes very, very, very difficult, right? So we're not even discussing the idea of shinobi no mono or shinobi no anything. We're talking about just espionage. At this point, is very, very difficult to track because these sort of the traditions of using the Chinese manuals has come back into existence, right? Because the Chinese manuals are so critical, you you almost they're so critical to the southern to Kusunoki and southern court, and the Kenmu restoration is successful. Yay! Even Ashikaga, the northern court, consider now they view the Chinese manuals as important. So there is a massive upsurge in the importance of the Chinese war manuals again. Boom, here we go, Takeda Shingen. We know he's a big Sonshi advocate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. List goes on. Da, 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 da. So it's no longer like looking for a definitive tradition. It's like, which tradition do you want to investigate at this point? Fuck the word shinobi. Like, we're not even talking about that word. We're talking about just espionage in general. It becomes extremely hard to clock and follow because at this point, from the mid 1500s on, there's so much espionage that's going out. Like, the secret's out. People are using it. The Imagawa have it. Like, in a previous video, I had mentioned about how the Imagawa. So the Imagawa have the Kusunoki manuals as well. The Imagawa, even though they're a Northern Court family, they end up with the manuals. There's a story behind that. They end up with the manuals. So now they know about shinobi this and shinobi that. They know about espionage and this and that and this and that. And they're a powerful family. The biggest problem with the Imagawa is that when Imagawa Yoshimoto is killed, then Oda and the Takeda gang up on Yoshimoto's son. And that is to be blunt, that's a real bitch. Imagine being stuck between Oda Nobunaga and Takeda Shingen. That is hell. So the Imagawa come off the map basically because Tokugawa Ieyasu is an Imagawa retainer for the first part of his life. Up until he's about 17, 18 at the Battle of Okehazama, when Imagawa Yoshimoto is defeated by Nobunaga, then Tokugawa arranges to become an Oda vassal, a retainer, and then he sends Hattori Hanzo. Now check this out, guys. He sends Hattori Hanzo to go defeat Imagawa's son, to put an end to the clan, so to speak. Wink, wink. When Hattori Hanzo shows up, they form sieges. Like, they get ready for a siege, right? But then, wink, wink, Hanzo meets with him and secures his surrender, and Imagawa becomes a retainer for Tokugawa. Wink, wink. And we'll just leave it at that. So, long story short, you see massive, powerful clans that have very prestigious histories with all manner of gunpo traditions undoubtedly flowing through them. And then they start to, one by one, merge with Nobunaga, merge with Toyotomi, merge with Tokugawa, right? So now Ieyasu, as we know, and then Sekigahara takes place, etc., etc., etc. So at this point, through this entire unification period, there's no question that espionage is being used. So much espionage is being used. So much power is trading hands so quickly. It's all over the place. All you have to do is just look. It's everywhere. But something special happened. But then, Tokugawa Ieyasu, Sekigahara, the Tokugawa shogunate. Peace, quote unquote. Not really peace. I mean, if we think about it, it's a very draconian kind of state, right? Um, with the last vestiges of the Toyotomi retainers sort of fizzling out in the early 1600s, Tokugawa Yasu passing away, Kiyomasa passing away, Fukushima passing away. You know, the old warriors sort of passing away. Japan turns into a draconian bureaucratic state, where then the espionage of the Tokugawa era is really secret policing of the population, government spies basically sent to make sure that local lords are not violating any provisions and to also keep the merchant guilds from getting uppity, things like that. Lots of accounts of government intelligence officers, putting down merchant guilds that are getting too powerful, shit like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that the history of espionage in Bushi culture is it starts off as Chinese, just it's the Chinese methods from the manuals as part of the conscripted army, rank and file conscripted army. Certain people who fit the right, have the right sort of mind and physical attributes. Just okay, you're going to be a spy. It's like whatever your position in the army is, right? Okay, well you're infantry and your intelligence, whatever. It's your rank and file job. 700s. Chineseified Japan fails. There's smallpox epidemic. There's a food shortage. Everybody feels like the Chinese way failed them. So they stick with it, but they start to become native Japanese again, so to speak. There's a lot of sort of, distinct Japanese things begin to sort of re-enter into the culture. The samurai pop up. Now there's no conscripted army, so now you got to have a security force led by the gentry. So the gentry run these security forces. They become powerful. You have independent manners, so to speak. If you don't know the term shoin, you should look it up. Shoin. You've got that system coming into place. Matter of fact, Kitabatake's Jino Shotoki, that Southern Court Bible, so to speak, the Jino Shotoki, has an entire chapter explaining like that was the biggest problem. Like, okay, so here's the thing. Let me also say this real quick. Southern Court believes that the country should have returned to a Buddhist, very Chinese way of being. In other words, that the Tiger reforms that led into the 700s needed to sort of like the Khmer Restoration needed to be something like that. Basically, taking Japan away from the warrior class from the 900s, the 1000, the 900s, thousands, 1100s, 1200s, you saw the Chinese way fall off and this warrior native Japanese warrior way grow within the samurai culture. And then the Southern Court ideology said there's too much, like there's too many warriors and they all want too much land, and them fighting over land is destroying the country. So we need to go back to a system where there isn't these land allotments with all of these different warriors vying for the land allotments. We need to go back to a Chinese way. So that's why I was trying to say earlier, the Southern Court is a very Chinese way of thinking. Masashige had a very Chinese way of thinking. So there's this ideology of trying to go back to Japan structuring itself on the Chinese principles. For example, the Southern Court believes that this is the real emperor, right? Go-Daigo, he's the real emperor. We should never like mess with that. Whereas then the Northern Court is, well, actually, there's one thing that's kind of backwards though. Let me explain this real quick, and I know I'm getting off on topic here, real quick, because somebody once asked me, but doesn't the mandate of heaven mean that the Northern Emperor should rule because he technically won, quote unquote? Well, first off, he didn't technically win. The war is still technically going on. There's actually people today that are still carrying the banner of the Southern Court. So technically, so the war's not over. Just the Northern Court is really winning right now. But the This is the one thing that's actually, this is the one exception that proves the rule. In Japan, it doesn't matter if you're pro-Chinese or anti-Chinese, whether you're, you know, like Kusunoki Masashige, who wants to fight in the way of the Chinese manuals, or if you are like the House of Oe, who wants to fight in a very native Japanese way, the Genji way, so to speak. Both of these systems agree on one thing, and that is that the mandate of heaven, the Chinese definition of the mandate of heaven, is is bullshit. It's to be thrown away. In Japan, whether you are Southern Court or Northern Court, or whether you are a samurai from the 900s or the 700s or the 800s or whatever, the mandate of heaven always and only refers to the fact that Japan is a divine country. So it has nothing to do with the mandate of heaven. Isn't the strongest has heaven's blessings. It is the country of Japan is divine, and the imperial line is the children of the gods. That is the mandate of heaven in Japan, in the Japanese imperial court, whether it's northern or southern, and in every one of the samurai manuals and teachings, within all the court documents, with everything, is very clear that this is the one exception to the rule. The Japanese that want to be based on Chinese, and the Japanese that want to be based on Japanese, both divisions, both sides of this debate, this argument, agree that the mandate of heaven in Japan is different than the mandate of heaven in China. They believe that in China, the gods mandate the strongest is the emperor, but that in Japan, because Japan is a divine country, the mandate of heaven means that the country is divine, and that the leaders of the country, the imperial line, is divine because they are the children of the gods. So that is a kind of a final note to end on. So then, interestingly enough, to sort of sum this last video up in the same words that I end in Praise of Spies on, within any of this context, then, to live and die in service to Japan, to the emperor, is Shinto. And therefore, to commit espionage in the name of the emperor is Shinto.